Good evening, and thanks very much for coming through. Can they really find themselves in trouble?
Yes, of course, Vuyo, you can. First of all, I think one needs to sympathize with their plight. On the other hand, one has to sympathize with the plight of the poor people in the community who can, for instance, not necessarily afford private health. And yeah, of course, they can be held accountable, and there are several legal principles that will come at play. Of course, first is the issue of an unprotected strike. Ordinarily, the no work, no pay principle will apply. But of course, there's also the potential liability against the municipality. Let's, for instance, say there's a health situation and a breadwinner dies because a particular service cannot be rendered. Of course, that person's family can potentially institute civil action against the municipality based on the principle of vicarious liability. Vicarious liability, they could also, for instance, institute action against the union for inciting an unlawful strike or an unprotected strike. And of course, the employees themselves could be held accountable, and they could inter alia face potential dismissal.
Well, apart from, let's park the dismissal one for a second and go to one of it. Can the municipality turn around and say, well, we have personnel that is supposed to look into all these issues, right? But they were not at work. Can they pass it on to them and say, sue them?
Well, the employees could be held accountable in a civil action, but primarily one will say, what caused this unprotected strike? And that becomes just a mitigating factor. But ultimately, the employer can be held liable on the principle of vicarious liability. That is for the conduct of their employees, in particular their unlawful conduct of their employees pursuant to their employment relationship. It's not a defence in law for the municipality to simply raise that point. They have to take action to mitigate that potential risk and loss, and that may imply bringing an application to the court, obviously ensure that the employees are paid, but my understanding is some of these disputes have been pending for months.
Yes, because, I mean, can the employees turn around and say, look, for our part, we did the best we could. We engaged the municipality. We engaged in sit-ins, which we saw. We set the mayor down, the municipal manager, and everybody who is involved, and tried to find an amicable solution to this. And can they also go back and say, mind you, we are where we are not through no fault of our own. These people actually handled or ran this municipality recklessly. Can those things, be put in front of a court of law if, say, they were to be sued as mitigating?
Of course, that would exactly be put before a court of law. But at the same time, you can't allow people to take the law in their own hands, particularly where you have an innocent community on the other hand, and one needs to find that balance. So in principle, that would be mitigating, but they can still not go on an unprotected strike. Talking the essential services.
But so what happens now? What happens now? What are the options? Well, there's a stalemate as it is. Yeah. Clearly, the municipality doesn't have money, but the workers are using the only weapon that they have. When similar things have happened before, what has been the sort of common or best ways of actually handling situations like this?
Well, the first remedy, of course, would have been to approach the court. Say, you're obliged to pay us. It's a law of contract. I render a service. The quid pro quo is I must be remunerated for that. And that is the first remedy. But I can't be, because I'm cross with my neighbour, go out in the street and shoot a traffic officer. There are other innocent parties, and they also have an entrenched right to delivering of certain services. But of course, as you correctly indicated, one sympathizes with their plight. But it remains unlawful, or unprotected at least.
It's a bit of a tricky one for everyone involved, and even more so for the people who deserve these services, because government has to give the services to them, because, as you correctly pointed out, a lot of them can't afford private healthcare.
The poor will suffer. But of course, officials could also be held accountable. That will be another category of law that may come into play.
Okay. That's what we're going to leave with. Thanks very much. Hugo Pinar, who is the director at Cliff Decker Hofmeyr. We'll bring you more sports news when Newsnight continues. Don't go away.